Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Bible study series. Today is part 28 of this whole thing, and man, today is a great one. I hope, well, all of them to me are great. I'm excited about each and every one. I hope they are to you. But for me specifically, what we're about to get into today, being chapters 36 and 37 today. Specifically, chapter 37 is where we are going to meet our man Joseph. And guys, this whole the story of Joseph's life within this whole covenant family, and how all of this is being divinely ordained and kind of assembled by God, according to His will. It's crazy. This story right here with Joseph, and just what happens and how we see God working. I mean, we've been seeing God work throughout the entire the entire story so far, and we will continue to. There's just moments, there's pockets though where you have such a crazy testimony, a crazy life story. We'll get to Moses eventually in the book of Exodus, and his story is absolutely out of this world. This is one of those as well, Joseph, and how the Lord is behind the scenes working and bringing about this purpose for Joseph's life that is going to do so much for so many people. It is absolutely insane. So I am really excited about this one. This is a great one, I think. But again, all of them have been incredible and awesome. If you missed the last part, please go back and do that. We went through chapters 33, 34, and 35. And again, today we're going to be going into 36 real quickly, and then a lot into chapter 37. Before we dive in, though, I wanted to point something out. I had a note about this and kind of ran out of time in the previous part. At the end of chapter 35, there's a key bit of information here that we need to take note of, highlight, and just kind of keep with us as we move on in this story. All right, and it's something so small, and it's very easy to skip over. And it's chapter 35. Verse 21, where it says, "Then Jacob, Israel, he traveled on and camped beyond at Migdal Eder," if I'm pronouncing that correctly. So he traveled on to a different part, different town, city, what you call it. And while he was living there, Reuben, all right, Reuben is Jacob's firstborn son. He is the oldest son, all right. Reuben had intercourse. He had sex with Bilhah, his father's concubine, one of Jacob's wives. Reuben goes and has sex with, and Jacob soon heard about it. And then these are the names of the 12 sons of Jacob. So it gives us this little bit of information, and then it just kind of moves on. Every single author is so specific. There's not one thing that we can just skip over. There's always something we can come back to. This was so quick, such a quick bit of information, but it's very specific, and there's a reason that it's put here. And we are definitely going to see that a little bit later on. And I did want to kind of put this in your brain too, what the Study Bible says here about this. All right, it says, Reuben's sin, having sex with Bilhah, his father's wife and his concubine, right? This sin was costly, although not right away. All right, as the oldest son, he stood to receive a double portion of the family inheritance and a place of leadership among his people. Reuben may have thought he had gotten away with his sin, and no more is mentioned of it until Jacob, on his deathbed, we'll get to that point, assembled his family for the final blessing. All right, kind of leave that there. We're going to get to that point. Quick note about sin. All right, and it's kind of delayed consequences. It says, sin's consequences can plague us long after the sin is committed. When we do something wrong, we may think we can escape unnoticed, only to discover later that the sin has been quietly breeding serious consequences. The reason that I wanted to make note of that and bring out what this is saying about sin. One, we need to keep this in mind about Reuben, what's going to happen later. Jacob on his deathbed, as far as the blessing and everything, it's going to come into play. But this about sin, I hope that you guys are realizing that as far as in these stories, especially with Jacob, where we've seen it, where his sin, when we meet him, his mother and they sin by deceiving, their family, right? With Esau, with the father Isaac as well, and with the whole blessing and birthright and things like that. And it's like, man, there were some immediate consequences, Jacob having to flee. But we saw in the story where there were, come years later, where Jacob was reaping the harvest of that sin, to where then he himself was reaping the consequences of that. He himself being deceived by his uncle Laban, and then later on we saw it as well. And so things just keep happening. We're actually going to see that one more time coming up. So hang on to that. Just a little note about that, and watch how all of this plays out. As always, don't forget to pray before diving into the Word. And man, let's get into this. Joseph's life and this whole story is crazy. Before we get to that though, chapter 36, I'm not gonna lie, it's one of those chapters in the Bible where it's all about lineage and descendants and just a bunch of names that are being thrown at you. And it's certainly not a chapter where you're just like, man, I can't wait to read this. And I understand it, I get it. The reason that this is being put in here, though, these descendants of Esau, is something that we have to pay attention to. We've talked about Esau in the past, how these descendants, as you read through these lists of names and everything, these descendants are becoming the nation of Edom, the Edomites. Okay, and this is a key because, as we mentioned before, chapters ago, this nation of Edom, right, in its own right, is going to become a big, powerful nation and everything. They are going to be hostile rivals against Jacob and Israel at this point, the nation of Israel. And so remember back when we go to Genesis chapter 25 and verse 23 there, with that prophetic word that the Lord gave Rebekah. Remember, Esau and Jacob were babies inside of her womb, and they were fighting around. It was a tough labor, and she's like, what is going on? And the Lord says, there's two nations inside of you, all right? And we know about the younger, and that getting switched around, and how the older is going to serve the younger and that type of thing. But he said these two nations will be rivals against each other, all right? So this descendant line of Esau and all of these names and everything like that, it is going to come into play. It's something that we need to just take note of, kind of store it back and remember this nation of Edom. It is going to play a much bigger role as we get further into the Old Testament and everything. In verse 31 there, it says, these are the kings who ruled in the land of Edom before any king ruled over the Israelites. All right, so that's telling us something right there, that, all right, there's eventually going to come a time, all right, when the Israelites are going to have a king that's going to be ruling over them and whatnot. So a little bit of foreshadowing, with this story and whatnot. So I know it's not the most fun thing to read. There are some cool names in there. Like, one of my favorite is Base Math. I love that one. It's awesome. But It's just something to take note of and understanding in the context of the story what this is, what this is for. Why are we getting these descendants of Edom who are going to become the Edomites and whatnot? Where do they sit in this whole story? Well, I just told you we're going to see that coming up soon. So it's definitely something that's important to hang on to. All right, getting into chapter 37. Here we go. And man, this one we've got a lot of notes. We've got a lot going on, and it just sets up this whole chunk of the pie, man, in such an amazing way. Here we're going to meet Joseph. All right, it says first that Jacob goes and settles again in the land of Canaan. All right, where his father obviously had lived as a foreigner. A quick note there in verse 2, it says Joseph at this time is 17 years old. All right, it says when Joseph was 17 years old, he often tended his father's flocks. Okay, he also worked for his half brothers as well, but he was one of those that was reporting, some of the bad stuff that was going on that his brothers were doing. So 17 years old, right? Keep this in mind, in this whole thing. He's just a kid. He's a teenager. All right, watch how this plays out. In verse 3, it says, Jacob, Israel, loved Joseph more than any of his other children, because Joseph had been born to him in his old age. So one day, Jacob had a special gift made for Joseph, a beautiful robe. But his brothers hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them, and they couldn't say a kind word to him. Boom. First time out, here we go. First off, we've already seen this type of thing before, where parents giving that preferential treatment to one child over the other. We just saw it, when it came to with Jacob and Esau, right? And how Isaac loved Esau and Rebekah loved Jacob, and it just kind of had this vibe of just conflict and this internal stress and type of thing that was going on there. Here, where it's picking right back up with that same tone, that same theme, how Jacob, right, doing the same thing that his parents did, showing this preferential treatment, loving Joseph more than any of his other 11, the 11 sons that he had and everything. Not only that, the next part is he goes above and beyond, and he designates Joseph in a way and does something. He gives him this special gift of beautiful robe. So it's not just this internal, type of distinction between Joseph and his other brothers. It's an outward. It's a visual thing. He is placing something on Joseph, giving him something that's beautiful, that designates him, that, sets him apart and whatnot from his other brothers. It's a visual thing, and this is just that, boom, that thorn, in his brother's side. And it says his brothers hated Joseph. Okay? So notice how it says they didn't hate Jacob. Okay? His father Jacob was just loving Joseph more. And it doesn't say that they hated their father, Jacob, Israel. It says they hated Joseph because their father loved him more than the rest of them. They couldn't say a kind word to him. So this is key. We've seen it before, and here we go. We're seeing again. And we've seen this type of behavior in a negative light. How do I put this? There's such a sub-layer to all this that we'll get to at the end when we kind of recap. And man, so this what is going on is not a good thing, but how there's this sub layer, this sub level symbolic thing that's happening here that we're going to see, and how it relates to something that is so just absolutely incredible. All right, so hang on to that. Quick mention about this robe. Okay, this beautiful robe. It says here in the study Bible that most robes were knee length, short sleeved, and plain. All right, so just kind of plain cloth, sack, whatever you want to call it. It says, in contrast, Joseph's robe was probably of the kind worn by royalty. All right, long sleeved, all the way down to his feet, and colorful, very bright and colorful. So very just kind of ordinary, attire for everyone else, and here Joseph has this beautiful, colorful robe on, something that royalty would probably wear during this day and age, this time and whatnot. And so that visual designation that that Jacob gives to his son Joseph, man, it's a big one. It's not just like, hey, here's your dad's tennis racket and you can have it instead of your other brothers. It's like, no, here's the keys to my Corvette. You're going to take this, and that type of thing. So this was not just a small act. Okay, this was something big. It in the context of the story, we have to think about this. Well, why did his brothers, hate him so much? Guys, the context, this is such a bigger deal than just giving, some small thing or piece of material. No, this was really designating him as something special. All right. So, to make matters worse, here we go. In verse 5, it says, one night Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers about it, they hated him more than ever. He says, listen to this dream. We were out in the field tying up bundles of grain, and suddenly my bundles stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. Man, so Joseph, we see that he's a dreamer, all right? He tells his brothers of this dream. We're like, what does this dream mean? We can kind of get an idea of it, but they actually answer it. They completely understand what he is saying and what this dream is about. All right, so check it out in verse 8. His brothers responded, so you think you will be our king, do you? Do you actually think that you will reign over us? All right, so they got it. All right, when it's talking about they're in the tying up bundles of grain, he says, Joseph's like, my bundles stood up, and your bundles all gathered around and bowed down low before mine. And so they see that as, okay, he's talking about kingship and all that type of thing. They're like, so you think you're going to be our king, huh? All right, you think you're actually going to reign over us? And they hated him all the more because of his dreams and the way he talked about them. All right, hang on. Verse 9, it gets even worse. Joseph had another dream, and again he told his brothers about it. And he said, listen, I've had another dream. He said, the sun, moon, and 11 stars bow down low before me. This time he told the dream to his father as well as to his brothers, but his father scolded him. All right, Jacob scolds Joseph. Keep saying Jacob. We know that his name has changed to Israel. So if I interchange them, sorry about that. Jacob's like, Joseph, what kind of dream is that? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? All right. See, I love that. So he tells them the dream. He's talking about the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bow down before me. Okay. This was very symbolic of the father being the sun, the mother being the moon, and the 11 stars, of course, being his 11 brothers. So they totally get this dream as well, and Jacob's like, Joseph, what kind of dream is this, man? He's like, will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow to the ground before you? So he's asking, this type of question. And it says in verse 11, he says, but while his brothers were still jealous of Joseph, his father wondered what the dreams meant, in terms of, he knows that this is signifying, being symbolic of his family coming, and bowing down to Joseph. But he's wondering what this means, like how, this fits into the stories, this prophetic, what is going on, what's going to happen, to where this type of dream, could become the reality, that type of thing. All right. So, man, Joseph is a dreamer. Man, it's not going over well with his family. His brothers absolutely hate him to the utmost right now. He's this young kid. He's 17 years old. Again, keep this in context. He's 17 years old. And he's like, I'm telling you these dreams. You guys are going to bow down to me. And, I'm going to be in this position. And you're, that type of thing. I get it. That could probably be a hard thing to hear. All right. Even his father, who loved him very much, was like, what is this? He scolded him for it, but he also wondered at the same time what this truly meant. All right. So hang on to that. It says in verse 12, with all of this building up, okay, soon after this, Joseph's brothers went to pasture their flocks at Shechem. Now, we have heard of this city before, and that was not great. So look where his brothers go out to pasture their father's flocks. All right, kind of an interesting note of where they kind of are going to take this whole scene. It said, when they had been gone for some time, Jacob said to Joseph, your brothers are pasturing the sheep at Shechem. Get ready, and I will send you to them. And Joseph's like, I'm ready to go. He's like, all right, go see how your brothers and the flocks are getting along. Then come back and bring me a report. So Jacob sends him on his way. Joseph traveled to Shechem from their home in the valley of Hebron. And I want to tell you, this is not, just a right around the corner trip. This is based on what this has given me here on the map in the Bible. This is about 40 to 50 miles away. So not in this day and time, certainly not a short trip to get out there. But notice with what we're about to get into for this story, why there is this distance that is put between their home and where the brothers are pasturing the flock. And then now Joseph is going out to his brothers and everything. All right. Joseph eventually gets there to Shechem. He runs into a man that lets him know that they had gone on to Dothan, which was a little bit further, about 10 or so miles further on. So Joseph, he continues on. And it says in verse 18, when Joseph's brothers saw him coming, they recognized him in the distance. And it says, as he approached, they made plans to kill him. It says, here comes the dreamer, they said. Come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns. And we can tell our father a wild animal has eaten him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. Ooh, man. So, first things first. I made a note of this. The underbelly of sin grows here, but watch how God will use plans of wickedness to actually be the means of accomplishing his plan. All right. So the underbelly of sin, has grown to the point, this hatred for Joseph, which was, started off as a hatred towards him because his father Jacob loved him more than anyone. So that piece of it has grown to where then when, Joseph tells them of the dreams and everything, oh my gosh, that hatred, that sin, that underbelly of sin just grows more and more and more. And here we get to this point to where they have gone off, into the distant, a distant land, about 50 miles from home, nice separated from their home and everything, to where they can do what they will with their 17-year-old brother Joseph. So they make plans to kill their little brother. And notice the tone there in verse 9. Here comes the dreamer. Okay, look, here comes this kid who's just dreaming these things. Alright, so let's kill him. Throw him in one of these cisterns. Look what happens next. So not only is there a plan to murder, alright, their little brother Joseph, look how it's also followed up with a deception towards who? Jacob. Alright, here it comes again. That good old deception coming back to bite and haunt Jacob once again. Alright, we can tell our father Jacob that a wild animal has eaten him. Alright, they're going to deceive their father as well. So not only has their hatred turned into doing one thing, planning one thing, they also are bringing their father into this and how they're going to deceive him. And then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. So apparently they hated him so much that if this dreamer, these dreams were going to come true, man, they were not happy with that. That was not going to fly. So let's make plans to get rid of this kid, and we'll see what comes of his dreams. Alright, verse 21. But when Reuben, the oldest, okay, remember, mentioned him before, when Reuben heard of their scheme, he actually came to Joseph's rescue. Now, not the type of rescue that we're full-fledged rescued and out of the woods yet, but he kind of diverts the plan a bit. He says, let's not kill him. Why should we shed any blood? Let's just throw him into this empty cistern here in the wilderness. Then he'll die without our laying a hand on him. Okay? It says that when Reuben heard of this scheme, that he came to Joseph's rescue. I want you to kind of make a side note that this is God coming to Joseph's rescue here, because Reuben, he's not really rescuing him. He's just saying, look, then he'll die without without us laying a hand on him, that type of thing, and whatnot. We're going to see how that plays out. He will come back to search, for Joseph, but this was God coming to Joseph's rescue here, okay, by way of a Reuben just diverting the plan a little bit. All right, so they when Joseph arrived, they ripped off the beautiful robe that he was wearing. They tear away that thing that designated him, that great, symbolic thing of their father's love and preferential treatment for Joseph. They grabbed him and threw him into the cistern. All right, it was empty and there was no water in it. And it says, then, just as they were sitting down to eat. Pause right there real quick. Their younger brother sitting down in this empty cistern. They fully plan on just leaving him there to die without water, food, or anything. And there's just no remorse or anything. They sit down and eat as their little brother is in this. So man, this wickedness, this sin is just, it's all out. There's no turning back at this point. And even though there's no turning back from sin, again, watch how God completely just plays out this whole thing. All right. It says, they sat down to eat, and they looked up and saw a caravan of camels in the distance coming toward them. And it was a group of Ishmaelite traders. Remember Ishmael and the Ishmaelites? We've covered that a few times here in the past few chapters and everything, so we're familiar with the Ishmaelites. It was a group of Ishmaelite traders taking a load of gum, balm, and aromatic resin from Gilead down to Egypt. And so Judah steps up and says to his brothers, "What will we gain by killing our brother? We'd have to cover up the crime. So instead of hurting him, let's sell him to those Ishmaelite traders. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood." All right, so Judah now is diverting the plan a little bit more, even more. And we say, Judah, make a little side note, this is God working things out just as planned. So he's taking the plan of wickedness of these brothers, and the Lord God is working this out to where it was murder. You know, they had a plan to murder him, to where the plan got diverted a bit, and now it's getting diverted a bit more. All right, and everything is so crazy how it's all going to work out. All right, so they pull him out. They're like, all right, let's do that. That sounds agreeable. Let's do it. They sold Joseph to the Ishmaelite traders for 20 pieces of silver. And the traders took him to Egypt. All right, now, verse 29, it says, sometime later, Reuben returned to get Joseph out of the cistern. So, again, when it says that Reuben, he heard of the scheme, and he was like, hey, man, let's not shed any blood, just throw him in the cistern. Seems like that was something to buy some time. Such an awesome thing. I love how everything in this thing is giving time. Every decision, every act that is happening is just allowing more time for God to work. And it is crazy. Reuben, the oldest, he does actually come back, right? He returned to get Joseph out of the cistern, but when he discovered that Joseph was missing, he tore his clothes in grief. Then he went to his brothers and lamented. He said, the boy is gone. What will I do now? All right. Now, this is funny because when we talk about Reuben and he coming to, coming to Joseph's rescue and everything like that, it was more, we can see by this, how this was worded right here, where he says, what will I do now? This was all just to salvage himself. He just didn't want to get in trouble, right? He didn't want to get caught, of this crime or anything like that. And it's like what the study Bible says. Instead of him saying, what will happen to Joseph? He says, what will happen to me? What will I do now? Now that he's gone, and oh my gosh, just thinking of himself, and maybe that was his mindset when even wanting to get Joseph out of the cistern to begin with, is not wanting he himself to get caught up in this, get in trouble, and be found out and whatnot. Too late now, man. He's gone. He's sold off. All right. Verse 31, it says, then the brothers killed a young goat and dipped Joseph's robe in its blood. All right. That robe that they tore off of him, that beautiful robe, they dipped it in the goat's blood, and they sent the beautiful robe to their father with this message. Hey, Dad, look at what we found. Doesn't this robe belong to your son? Man, even the way that they sent the message to their father Jacob is like, ooh, it's so deceitful and twisted. It's not like, hey, look at what we found. This is Joseph's coat that you gave him. This is his robe that you gave him. This something happened. They said, look, doesn't this robe belong to your son? Man, they put that in a way to where Jacob would have to look at it and recognize it, and he did immediately, and he says, yes, this is my son's robe. He says, a wild animal must have eaten him. Joseph has clearly been torn into pieces. So then Jacob tore his clothes and dressed himself in burlap. This was custom of the day. This is how they mourned and grieved and just poured out, in their grief and everything was something like this. Tore their clothes. They would throw ash, all over themselves, dressed themselves in burlap, like a sack put on him. And he mourned deeply for his son for a long time. His family all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. And he said, I will go to my grave mourning for my son. And that's what he would say as he would weep. Right? It says, meanwhile, the traders arrived in Egypt, where they sold Joseph to a man named Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And Potiphar was captain of the palace guard. Man, so we see we see again where this sin just doing things and just not the right way. It all started with the preferential treatment, of Joseph, and making that such a visual display. This was a negative thing in this situation because of how the brothers obviously reacted to it. The context of it is negative. Look at what has happened. It drove the brothers to hatred. And then comes along the dream about bowing down to Joseph, so they plan to kill him and everything like that. And guys, I gotta tell you that yes, the whole context seems so negative, that this is so bad, and meanwhile this is the greatest thing that is happening to Joseph right now. And you're like, what? Okay, because of how God is working behind the scenes, and we're seeing it out here, how the plan of wickedness has shifted, more and more, where Joseph is going to wind up. We know about the dreams that he had and everything like that. And guys, I'm telling you, all of this is working out according to God's plan, using the plan of men and their hatred and their sin and their wickedness. And he is going to use all of that to bring about such good and blessing and amazingness. Just watch. So yes, all of this is in a negative context. People aren't doing things the right way here, but God is always doing the right thing through it. All right, and check this out, guys. This is pretty crazy here. First, I wrote a note. Look at the bigger picture. All right, how I kind of did a recap there, but watch how God takes the jealousy of man, the hatred of man, the plan of man, and then maneuvers it. We're going to see how he is maneuvering this all to accomplish his will. God has all hearts in his hands, and he overrules all to serve his own greater purpose of good. And this is all going to be to make Joseph an instrument that will save many. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, when we talked about the special designation of Jacob the father to his son, and how he was then rejected, saying, given this dream, this vision of I am going to rule over you, there was jealousy, there was rejection, plan to kill him because of it. This is incredible because, guys, my second note here, big one, is that Joseph's life was like a precursor, or we've talked about a type of Christ. Okay, we've talked about that before. So Joseph's life, it was a type of Christ. It was a precursor to the life of Christ. All right, Matthew Henry says this. It says, look up Matthew Henry if you haven't. Scholar from way back. It says, for he was the beloved son of his father. Guys, write this down. Joseph was the beloved son. All right, Jesus is the beloved son of his father, hated by everyone else. All right, Joseph loved by his father Jacob, hated by all the others. Jesus loved by his Father God, hated by a wicked world. And yet, the Father sent him out to them in great humility and love. So remember, as the brothers were off, right, tending to the flock and everything like that, and Jacob sends Joseph, his beloved son, out to them. Okay, I have to think, Jacob was aware of kind of the tension and friction and everything, but he sends him out anyway, just as the Father sent out the Son, Jesus, to the world in great humility and love. All right? His own received him not and crucified him. His own family, his own brothers, okay, Joseph and his brothers, they received him not. They planned to kill him. And they essentially did this in their minds and their hearts with selling them off as a slave. That was pretty much a death sentence as it is. But how God is going to work that out. So his own received him not and planned to kill him. And just as with Jesus, his own people received him not, and they crucified him. But this was all to save and redeem everyone. All right. So again, guys, man, when we take that step back and we look at the bigger picture with all the fine details of this that we can gather, and we are starting to see here that Joseph's life is a type, of Christ. It's kind of this, that precursor that we mentioned and whatnot, even in such a negative context that it is in, where people are doing wrong. But look at how all of this lines up to the story of Jesus. And man, I can't take credit for putting that together. There's no way. This gentleman, Matthew Henry, he's seeing this and tying it, guys, in every single thing with what's going on. We're seeing how it ties to Jesus in some sort of way. It is crazy. All right, so man, rewind and go back and write that down if you like, and everything. And man, I'm telling you, in the next chapter, in chapter 38, we're going to kind of have a break from this story of Joseph. We're going to get into kind of a story with Judah right there in 38, but then in 39 it will pick back up again with this story of Joseph. And it is absolutely incredible. But man, we're just seeing how no matter the plan or the hearts of men and what we're trying to do, right, wrong, sinful, right, whatever, God is working and his will is going to be done, and he is going to do things despite what all of these wicked brothers are doing right here. Watch how Joseph in his life, with what God does and where he raises him to, will actually end up saving the very people, his own brothers that were planning to kill him, and essentially in their minds and hearts were doing by selling him off to those traders. Okay, Joseph and how God works through him is actually going to save the very people that planned to kill him. Man, what? Boop, boop, boop. Telling you guys, this thing is awesome. All right, so pray over that. Hope all that made sense and came together. Take lots of notes. Again, there's such a it's so hard to do this reading the Bible. I get it. That's why meditating and praying on this word is so key, because we see kind of this top layer of a story and we can just read through it and like, man, this is a good story. But then there's this other layer, this sub level to the story that is tying in and working to something even greater, that bigger picture that, guys, we just have to constantly keep tapping into in the midst of these little nugget stories here and everything. And it is crazy, the theme of sin, and I hope that you guys are seeing that trend and that pattern and everything that's going on, but how God just constantly is working to constantly overcome it and do something that's going to produce good, to produce life and everything. It's awesome. That it is everything. That this is the whole Bible. Us sinning and God constantly working to repair that and restore us and save us. This is it. We're going to see it with this man Joseph as well. So, till next time.